It's all right. We're not gonna hurt you. George, I got her. Keep still, and I'll release you.
What's the status? Over!
We've been engaged! Bad guy coming out!
That Tango group has permission to pursue.
-4, stay on the entrance. 2, handle her. 5 and 6, clear the hole.
It's often said, where prestigious entertainment franchises are concerned, that the only thing worse than a bad sequel is a bad prequel. Very often, the last thing anyone needs or wants is for the ground level origins of a story to be laid bare, but sometimes a franchise comes along that begs to have the blanks in its mythology filled in, where the apparently missing information nags at the corner of your fanboy brain so incessantly that you want it no matter what. That's certainly how I felt about Halo Combat Evolved, a game so clearly epic in scope that it seemed to warrant more setup than its jarringly brief intro sequence allowed. It was a game that threw the player into the thick of things quickly, with only scant in-game references to the unseen story events that preceded it, and that left me wanting more established backstory in the game itself. Almost a decade, one console generation, and a ton of spin-off media I couldn't be bothered to keep up with later, my wish was granted, because that's when Halo Reach appeared, a game that intriguingly tackles a key point in the series' mythology head-on. Here's where we'd get to see and play through the big historic engagement in the Halo universe that kicked everything off, as the alien forces of the Covenant laid waste to Planet Reach. Besides addressing such an interesting part of the overarching Halo story, Halo Reach is pretty noteworthy in that it casts you as somebody other than the series' main protagonist, the Master Chief. Rather than stepping into his oversized green boots again, you'll don the armour of Noble 6, a new recruit to the ranks of Spartan Noble team stationed on Planet Reach, and you're about to have a really bad day. From a distance, Reach might sound like a bit of a departure from previous games in the series, but make no mistake, this is still Halo through and through. There's just been a bit of tinkering done with its established play mechanics, which is something I think all games in a long-running franchise should do to some extent. Otherwise, they stagnate. The danger lies in altering things to a point where they're no longer recognisable. But by the time Reach was released, its developers, Bungie, had thankfully honed these games to a pretty fine degree, so the alterations that have been made for this one are more by way of tweaks and new added features than an outright mutation of it into something else. What's most noticeable here is that there's no dual wielding of weapons, making the game feel a bit more like the original Halo than its sequels. You'll also get to use things like night vision and new Spartan armour abilities. One of these, the ability to sprint, is installed in your armour by default when you start the game, but as you progress you'll find gear stashes where you can swap it out for another. These include options to deploy a defensive shield, project a hologram decoy, or momentarily lock your armour to the spot for a defensive bonus. I get the impression that these are the sort of things that get changed around in the series to keep multiplayer modes fresh. But I don't do multiplayer, because interacting with real people in video games is overrated as far as I'm concerned. I play these games for the single player experience, and to distract me from the sucking void where my social life should be. And Halo Reach does that pretty nicely, thank you very much, with what I personally consider to be one of the best campaigns of the entire series. It's a grim, gritty, action-packed ride down 50 miles of bad road on another planet. Just my kind of thing, really. In terms of campaign length, Reach is a pretty average sized game for a first person shooter. I think I got something like 6 or 7 hours out of it on my first playthrough on the normal difficulty setting. Play it on the heroic or legendary settings though and you'll doubtless make it last longer. That said, the length of the game isn't an issue for me, because it's one I find myself easily able to come back to thanks to the tone and execution of its story. It's the kind of thing that really stays with you a long while after completion, and for what it's trying to convey as part of the series' overarching narrative, it's certainly weighty enough. I think the replay value of these games comes from the fact that, besides playing really well, they work together to build a cohesive, enthralling saga. In this case, playing through events that lead directly into Halo Combat Evolved is certainly enough to keep things interesting, and there's a lot of care invested in the storytelling. It's a pretty dark entry in the series, and in keeping with that, you won't find the comic relief or lighter elements of the other games here. Just check out the Covenant grunts in this one, for instance. They're not the hilariously chatty figures of fun they were when we first met them. They'll still run away from you waving their arms in the air like spiny maracas, but they're more likely to charge at you with a pair of active grenades in hand to suicide bomb you. I mean, sure, they did that in Halo 3, so it's nothing new, but it doesn't matter that you've seen it before, it's still pretty sinister. Something I really enjoy about the way Halo Reach plays out is the sense that you're caught up in a rapidly escalating crisis. What begins as your first day with Noble Team checking out rumours of trouble with human rebels quickly turns into your first encounter with Covenant forces. It's a short step from there to seeing the full scale of the Covenant's purpose, and before you know it, you're running and gunning across the planet as gigantic capital ships appear overhead and an alien invasion gets properly underway. There's a palpable sense that you're fighting a losing battle here, although that feeling that's common to the best Halo games, where you might as well have been cast as an action hero blazing away at hordes of evil aliens in a big budget sci-fi movie, is still here in a big way. And the inclusion of stages where you're called on to defend Reach from orbit in a space dogfight or fly across its cityscape to aid evacuation efforts only adds to the epic scope of this outing. This has always been a series that could claim a cinematic quality about it, but Reach really nails it thanks to the way it incorporates these elements. They're a really neat progression of the vehicular combat that was always a part of Halo. There are some aspects of Reach that I'm not so enamoured with though. For one thing, the frame rate dips noticeably at times, making it clear that the game is pushing the 360's hardware. It's most noticeable during vehicular sections, and this kind of thing always makes me question why software developers seem content to test consoles apparently just beyond their limits. There's also an annoying imbalance between enemy and allied AI. Familiar Covenant foes are present and correct, with the previously mentioned grunts acting as bullet sponges and trickier elites who'll dodge your aim with acrobatic leaps and rolls, as well as a few variants of those who'll give you a really hard time. Your own teammates aren't quite so gifted though. When you meet friendly fire teams, they seem to excel at getting themselves killed unless you stick close by to assist them, and a couple of times I found myself being nudged out of cover by them. But whenever there's a vehicle introduced into the equation, they become truly stupid. Seriously, don't let one of them drive, they'll just take forever to get the vehicle moving, and getting an ally to jump into the passenger seat of a Warthog sometimes feels like you're calling the cat in at night. He'll stand there and look at you, maybe shift on the spot a bit, and if you're lucky he might jump in sooner rather than later. At least when the cat does that, you're not being shot at. Unless you are, in which case, for God's sake, find a safer place to live. My only other halfway substantial criticism is that the ability to sprint, which I always curse the original Halo for not having, needs to be set as your active armour ability to use it. If you don't have it, well, you don't have it, and that's that. It's not too big a deal, as I honestly didn't find the other abilities you can pick up to be all that helpful. At least, not the way I play. There are times when it makes sense to use them, certainly, but to me it's always frustrating when you can't run away from a grenade just because you don't have the ability to do so installed. I mean, what kind of technologically enhanced cyborg super soldier are you if you can't just jog away from impending death without a software upgrade? Overall though, it's easy to forgive those kinds of annoyances, because the rest of the game works so well. It's a very fluid feeling, flawlessly presented shooter. As a franchise, Halo has always been notable for its high production values, and Reach certainly doesn't disappoint in that respect. The events you play through are cleverly paced and structured, the militaristic aspect of its story doesn't stray too far into cliché, and the game's so big on atmosphere that it's tough to put down. But for me, its most notable achievement is that it manages to take a downbeat narrative and make it completely immersive, leading to a finale that manages to feel somehow triumphant, even as it's punching you square in the gut. I'll make no bones about the fact that I'm a confirmed card-carrying Halo fan, but this is easily one of my favourite, most replayed installments. Besides the fact that it manages to put a clever spin on a familiar experience, it makes for a memorable coda to Bungie's stewardship of the series. And if we'd never got any more Halo by way of 343 Industries after this, leaving Reach as the last Halo game we ever got, I think I'd have been okay with that, because going out in a blaze of glory is what this one's all about.